Hello everyone, Andrew here, and welcome to today's video, which is something that I have actually wanted to do since I first created this channel way back then a couple of years ago. And for some reason, it just kind of was something I never really got around to, but it's kind of a good thing because I've added some things to this kind of set since I started this channel. So I figured that this was probably a good time to finally get around to doing this. And the thing I want to talk about is, if you have read the title, you probably already know, I want to talk about the Atari 2600 and some of the different variations that it had. Now let's see, which side should I be showing? Because both sides look almost exactly the same. So here is kind of one of the Atari 2600 boxes. And yeah, both sides of it look almost exactly the same, except I think this side has less writing on it. Actually, I don't know. Both sides look pretty much exactly the same. This box right here is for model number CX-2600. So I believe that was the model number for the original model and the second model. I don't think there was any difference between those two. But yeah, overall, there were just a ton of variations of this thing. I mean, you think that today, consoles having variations like, oh, the PlayStation 3 has like 3 variations. That's way too many. I mean, the Atari 2600 had many variations, so I thought it would be an interesting video to just kind of show some of the different ones in my collection. I mean, there's still some that I'm even missing from here, but overall, I think that I have enough to do kind of a good, thorough video on what some of the different versions of the console look like. So I believe that's the box. Like I said, I don't know if it's for the original version or the second model, because I believe they both have the same number. But I mean, the first and second model look so similar, I mean, it doesn't really matter anyway, but without further ado, let's get on to it. And the first model that I want to show is this model right here. This is definitely, the typical model that people usually think about when they think about the Atari 2600. And that is, the wood grain kind of panel on the front, and the 6 switches there with your cartridge slot. And the AV cord is built in, and I don't have this one tied up, so it's just kind of getting in the way. But overall, this is just kind of your typical model. This model and the second model are very similar, except this one is known as the Heavy Sixer, the original Atari 2600 model. That's because if you lift it up, it feels quite heavy compared to the other models that I'm going to show you. Also, one thing you should note about this model right now is that these kind of curved edges here, they're not, kind of, it's not like a corner, it's kind of curved. So note that when you're looking at the other models of the Atari 2600. But other than that, it has the typical 6 switches on the front. You have your power on and off switch. You have your black and white switch, because, back then, who knows what kind of TV people are using. Your difficulty switch. Your left difficulty switch and your right difficulty switch, which means, like a difficulty for each player, because you had your left controller and you had your right controller port on the back. I always hated that the controller ports were on the back. It was kind of a pain. You also have your power place to plug your power cord in to the back. You have your game select, which was used for some things. Because, sometimes you'd have, like, different modes on the same cartridge, so you'd have to press that a billion times to finally get to the one that you want. And just your typical game reset switch. But yes, this is the typical model of the Atari 2600, like I said, that most people think about. And just take a good look at it and kind of compare it to how it looks to some of the other models that I'm about to show you. Because like I said, that was the first model, and this is the second model. And definitely note what I was just talking about, and that is that these are a lot more like, flat corners rather than just, a nice smooth curve, and that's pretty much one of the only differences with this model and the other one. Also, including the fact that this one is a lot lighter, because like I said, they call the other one the Heavy Sixer, because it is heavy and has 6 switches. Well, this is like the lighter Sixer, I guess, because it also has 6 switches, but it is a lot lighter than the last one. But overall, other than that kind of appearance on the front, the fact that it is lighter, and also that you have the addition of, where is it now? Oh, over here. You probably can't read it, but you have kind of a channel switcher, which I don't believe the first one had. Those are just some of the main differences between the first model and the second model. I also believe that this one was made in China or something like that. Yeah, this one was made in Hong Kong. I believe the original model was made in California. Yeah, in Sunnyvale, CA. So that's kind of just the main difference between the first model and the second model. Also, I believe that the back also looks a little bit different. You have a sticker there which tells you right controller, left controller, and power adapter, rather than it actually being engraved on the console. But let's see. So I know that some people, they kind of go after the Heavy Sixers because they aren't super common. So that's the easiest way to tell, is just by looking at the front and seeing that kind of difference in the wood panel, where the one that isn't heavy is a lot kind of straighter, and the Heavy Sixer kind of has, the perfect curve on the front there. So that's an easy way to tell if you are hunting out a heavy sixer. So I'm pretty sure that they all follow that rule. But anyway, the next version of the Atari 2600, I spent quite a while on the first two, is this one right here. Now, the most obvious difference is that the third version only has 4 switches on the front, so obviously this can't be the heavy sixer or the lighter sixer. And that is because 2 of the switches were actually moved to the back, and those 2 switches, I believe they were, let me see, we have the channel switch, which was on the bottom of the last one, moves to the top, and yeah, that's what I thought. The difficulty switches are the ones that were moved up there, kind of right beside the controller, which I believe, I guess makes some sense, but otherwise, all your typical kind of buttons are still on the front there, and yeah, and it also still has kind of that more angular front rather than the curved front that the original heavy sixer had. Also, this would be a good time, as I kind of forgot to point out, just what the original Atari 2600 controller looks like. You know, you have kind of the orange ring around it. I've also seen a white ring one and the black ring one, although I believe that the black one is just because the kind of color has been rubbed off, unless there was one that just originally came with black. I mean, there never was any color on there. Maybe because they got lazy and the paint was costing too much money or something like that. I don't really know, because I never have bought an Atari console new. You know, I just kind of have what I can go buy on boxes and things that I have. But overall, this is just your typical Atari 2600 controller. It has the same plug that the Sega Genesis has, although I guess the more correct term would be the Sega Genesis has the same kind of plug that the Atari 2600 had. You know, just kind of your I believe, what is it? Yeah, 9 pins there, I believe it is. That it kind of plugs into. But overall, you have one button, and you have your kind of crazy control stick here. I've honestly never liked this controller. I find it really hard to control with this thing here, and I mean, you have your one button there. But overall, that is what people, you know, used to play with back in the day. No one knew that, you know, a few years down the road, Nintendo would come out with this incredible controller that people would be copying for centuries. You know, look at any controller today, and you can clearly see it's been inspired by probably the Super Nintendo controller. But overall, yeah, that is just the original Atari 2600 controller there. But moving on to the next kind of variation, you will see that it never really goes back to the original 6 switches of the original ones, as this one here still only has 4 switches. And, you know, just from looking at it from this angle, you can't really see any difference until you look at it from the front and see that they got rid of that crazy wood grain and instead put a plastic black panel on the front. Now, people refer to this as the Darth Vader console because it's just completely black, you know, get it? Everything had to be a Star Wars reference back then. It was so popular. But overall, yeah, this is probably one of my favorite variations of the Atari 2600, just because I'm not, you know, a huge fan of the wood grain that was popular way back then. But overall, it looks really nice, and I believe that this was also the very first appearance of the Atari logo, which, you know, would be their logo for many, many, many years afterwards, too. Overall, you still have your main 4 switches there, like I said. Same things on the back, and it was still made in Hong Kong. So, only the first version was not made in Hong Kong, I believe. But anyway, there's another version there. I'm kind of stacking them up pretty high. But overall, like I said, that's a really cool version. That seems to be the version I find a lot around here. I mean, I haven't found an Atari in quite a while, but it's usually that version for some reason. I guess that one was probably made for quite a long time and sold quite a few copies. But anyway, moving on. The next, like, you know, main kind of version of the Atari 2600 was this one right here. Now, this is a very, very compact version of the Atari 2600. Now, I suppose I'll take one of the other ones so I can kind of compare just the size. So here we have our Darth Vader console, and here we have our mini Atari 2600. Not to mention, you know, the fact that it's way thinner as well. It's kind of tried to hold them up there. Hopefully people can see just how much smaller this one is. But overall, all the switches on it are very, very different. Now, the reset and game select buttons, you actually push them down instead of just kind of sliding them up temporarily like on the other console. And you have your on and off switch, and you still have your color black and white there in case people were still using black and white TVs at this time, which I guess could make sense. Also, controller ports are still on the back, which I hate, but overall, just all your typical stuff there. And this one, I believe it was still made, no, actually this one was made in Taiwan. Would you look at that? I mean, but it definitely wasn't made in California like the original one. So let's see, so put that one there. And, actually, I guess I shouldn't be putting that one away because we have one more variation of the mini Atari 2600. I guess I should actually get the other one out so we can kind of compare them. And as you will see, this one has a much longer kind of rainbow strip, rather than this one where it just kind of underlines the word 2600 there, or the Atari 2600. So overall, this one is pretty much exactly the same, except for some reason they felt the need to change the kind of front panel there. I have no idea why. And this one, I believe, was still made in Taiwan. So there you go with that. And one of the very last versions of the Atari 2600 that I want to show is the Telegames Atari 2600 Video Arcade. So I believe that this was actually kind of Sears' version of the Atari 2600s. I guess they had, some kind of deal or something like that, where they made one specifically for Sears, or I don't know exactly how it worked back then, if people had deals to make things. I'll get into that in a few minutes. But overall, yeah, so I believe that this was sold exclusively at Sears. It has 6 switches on it, just like the original Heavy Sixer. It also feels heavy, like the original Heavy Sixer, too. I heard that this was actually based on the very original version, and this one was actually made in, Sunnyvale, California. I hope I'm saying that. It's not Sunnyvale. It's Sunnyvale. I hope it's Sunnyvale. I don't live there, so it's not something I really say every day. Yeah, overall, this was apparently based on, the very original Atari 2600. Although the funny thing is that it has the more angular edges, unlike the Heavy Sixer, even though I'm pretty sure that this has almost the exact same inside components as the Heavy Sixers. It definitely feels a lot heavier than the other ones, but overall, you kind of have the wood grain panel, although it's a really strange pattern. It's not just, normal wood grain. Not sure what's up with that. And you have, it's kind of white up here instead of just, the typical black, where, it kind of says the names of things. So overall, that is just kind of a cool thing to have, and it looks just like the back of the other ones. So yeah, so that is kind of the Sears version of the Atari 2600. But there are still more things to talk about. Because, you have all your, they're actually called Atari 2600s. You have your Sears Telegames, and then you have the Coleco Gemini. Now, Coleco, people might be saying that sounds familiar from the ColecoVision. Now, I don't know how they ever actually pulled this off. I mean, obviously, the rules of video games were way different back then, and people could just make whatever the heck they wanted, and it was like a massive free-for-all, and no one cared. But Coleco, like I said, the same people who made the ColecoVision actually made their own version of the Atari 2600. So, I mean, imagine if that happened today. Next year at E3, Sony announces the PlayStation U, which plays Wii U games. Like, that would be so bizarre, but this is a Coleco console that plays Atari 2600 games. Now, I actually really like this. This is one of my, despite the fact it's not even an official Atari 2600, I actually really like the design of this thing. I mean, I like the fact that the switches are all on the front there. The controller ports are actually on the front, thank goodness. And, you have your cartridge slot on top. Your power and AV spot, power and RF spots on the back, just like they should be. And yeah, overall, this thing is really cool. And it was made in Taiwan and not Hong Kong. But overall, I really, really, really like this variation of the Atari 2600, even though it wasn't actually made by Atari, which is kind of funny. And one of the things I like about it most is actually the controller. So, this is the controller that came bundled with the Atari, not the Coleco Gemini, not the Atari Gemini. And it has a much nicer control stick. Not, this massive thing, which is, so hard to move. And, I hate using it for playing games. The Coleco Gemini has this much nicer control stick. It also has this kind of turning thing at the bottom here, which would have been used in games, like Warlords. It's kind of like a Pong type thing in, Arkanoid. So you can move paddles around, which is kind of cool. And the button is on the side here, which is very conveniently placed. I mean, you just hold it like this, use the other thing with the other hand, and there you go. So overall, I find this 10 times more comfortable to use than the normal Atari 2600 controller, and this is actually what I have hooked up to my TV to play Atari 2600 games. Just because, the switches are all in the front, which is nice, the controllers plug into the front, so I mean, I couldn't really have this in, kind of my cabinet in front of my TV if the controllers are coming out of the back, because that would be a huge pain, plug them in every time I wanted to play a 2-player game. So overall, that is the main thing that I used to play my Atari 2600 games, and it wasn't even made by Atari, which is kind of funny. So I don't know how they pulled that off back then. I figured, was there some kind of lawsuit maybe I haven't read about? I have no idea, but if that didn't get them in trouble, I have no idea how this did not get Coleco in trouble. Because, I mean, you think Coleco making their own separate console to play Atari games is bizarre. Coleco actually made an adapter for the ColecoVision, which allowed you to play Atari 2600 games on your ColecoVision. Now, how that did not get them in trouble, I have no idea. It was, I mean, you thought that Sony saying they were going to make a whole new console to play Wii U games was bad. Now Sony's making a new thing that says, just plug this into the front of your PlayStation 4 and it will play Wii U games. Like, that is the most bizarre thing. I can possibly imagine. It plugs into the expansion port on the side of your ColecoVision, and now you don't even have to go out there and give money to Atari for an Atari console. You can just buy this for your ColecoVision and plug your Atari games into it. And that's crazy. So I mean, I guess that Atari is still getting some money when you have to buy their games, but still, it's just really, really bizarre that back then there were actually, adapters for consoles that allowed you to play games for other consoles, which is just completely weird. And that's something you'll obviously never, ever, ever see today, which I just find completely bizarre. But anyway, I believe that is all of the variations of the Atari 2600 I have. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 consoles and 1 expansion adapter. That is quite a lot for, one console that was out for quite a few years until it crashed, and then Nintendo kind of came in and just stood on top of everyone. And, yeah, they are, everyone I'm sure knows the story about how, they kind of became the most massive video game company out there. But just as a kind of quick conclusion, I thought I would talk a little bit about the Atari 2600 games. I mean, you thought there were a lot of variations of the console. Well, there are a lot of variations of the Atari 2600 cartridge as well, because I guess just because you didn't need permission to make a console that played Atari 2600 games, you probably didn't need permission to make Atari 2600 games either. Because, I mean, as long as you had the equipment and, you had like a computer in your basement or something like that, you could just crank out Atari 2600 games, I guess. So there are a whole bunch of different weird cartridge variations. This does not even begin to kind of show all of them. I could have spent all day going through my collection, getting one out of every single kind, but I guess these are just some of some of the more common ones I wanted to show. But anyway, just to start off, this is your typical Atari 2600 cartridge, and this is Combat. This is what cartridges looked like, I believe, back around when the Atari 2600 first came out. There wasn't really any cover art or anything like that. It was just a kind of list of different game modes on the front, and it has the name on the end like that. Then later on, once Atari started picking up speed, they came out with games that actually had pictures on the front as well as the names, and it still has the name on the end. So these two are actually the exact same game, just obviously the one with the picture came out a little bit later. And yeah, so overall, most Atari 2600 games look like this, and there's a whole bunch of different ones that have pictures like that. Then, another kind of Atari 2600 game are ones like this, in strange white cartridges, such as Donkey Kong. Now, if you read on the back, it says, bonus cartridge included with Gemini purchase. Now, man, that is the most non-focusing thing ever. So, it looks like that. So this is, this Donkey Kong cartridge actually would have been bundled with the Gemini, so I don't know exactly how that works. If, Coleco stole the data off of a normal Atari game, put it on their own cartridges, and then when they sold a cartridge that looked like this, they made sure that Atari got none of the money. I just cannot comprehend how some of these things worked back in the day. It is too bizarre. But obviously, even though these work on any Atari 2600, just as any Atari 2600 games works on the Coleco Gemini, I guess that Coleco really wanted to home in on the Atari 2600 market, so they sold their own version of cartridges as well, because Atari also had their own versions of games like Donkey Kong. Just like that. So I mean, I guess you could either side with Coleco or side with Atari. Take your pick. But overall, I find it so bizarre. Just how things worked back then. Unfortunately, this isn't really the generation where I was out and about buying video games, so I don't really know exactly how things would have worked. Like, when you bought a game in the store, these two things be on the shelf together, like, buy me, and then just, which company would get all your money. So I have no idea exactly how it worked. If someone wants to explain that in the comments below, I would really appreciate that. But anyway, here's another kind of bizarre cartridge, kind of a weird handle here to pull it out, I guess. And this is a Demon Attack by Imagic. Get it? It's kind of like Imagine, but magic shoved together. It's creative, believe me. Overall, just kind of like that. And you have another kind of weird cartridge here by Spectra Video, and this is Gas Hog. There were a few games like this. Overall, I think there's actually a few rare ones that have cartridges that look like this, but overall, we have that. And this is one of the most bizarre cartridge types ever. This is Vulture Attack, and I mean, there's kind of like a strange handle, I guess, for you to, kind of grab it with two fingers and pull it out of your console. Usually, cartridges that have this shape are kind of rare. So, I mean, even if you know nothing about Atari, if you ever go to a thrift store and you see a cartridge that has a handle like this, you should definitely just pick it up. Just to have it in your collection, because these games are usually pretty cool to have. I know that, what was it, Air Raid, I believe, it was like a multi-$1,000 game that sold not too long ago, had a cartridge like this, except the cartridge color was blue. Overall, I accidentally got this game when I bought, many, many years ago, back when I didn't really have too much Atari 2600 stuff. I walked into a Goodwill, and they had just a massive, like, clear, almost plastic garbage bag. It had a Coleco Gemini in it, with all the cords, 2 controllers, and about 100 games for $50. So since I had hardly any Atari 2600 stuff at the time, I bought that, and this just happened to be one of the games, and I had no idea what it was worth. And overall, this is definitely not a super common game. And even though I'm not too worried about the money value or anything like that, it definitely can go for a decent amount, around about $100. So let's take my advice. If you ever see games with the handles like that, pick them up, because I don't believe that there are really any of them out there that aren't worth anything. I think that most of them are pretty rare. So pick up those ones with the handles on the end. That is my advice to you. Because I know that, there's just thousands of Atari 2600 games out there. So if you ever see it, if you're like looking through a bin and you see one like that, pick it up. Also, we have these really weird games. These look like Intellivision games, although someone shoved a kind of piece onto the end to make them fit into an Atari 2600, which is really bizarre. Overall, this is Frogs and Flies. Fortunately, no really cover art there, just a plain black cartridge. And the last cartridge that I have to show is this one, which is really bizarre. And this is actually 2 games in one. You have Robin Hood, and you have Sir Lancelot. So yeah, basically you choose which end you want to put into the console, and then you can play that game. There were a few of these out there as well. Definitely pick these ones up if you see them, because I don't think that they're too common. I only have a couple. But yeah, so overall, I find that kind of bizarre. These days, you buy the Jak and Daxter trilogy, 3 games on 1 disc, but back then if you wanted 2 games on 1 cartridge, you had to put 1 in each end, which is kind of funny. And yeah, that's just kind of the sum of the different cartridge variants that I wanted to show. And just to quickly finish up, just wanted to show an Atari 2600 box there. Of course, everyone knows E.T. This is kind of what your typical Atari 2600 box would look like. There were some other ones, like this is kind of a second version of an Atari 2600 box. There were some which were just like kind of a blank color with the picture on the front. And also there were even a couple of big box Atari 2600 games, such as this one, Star Raiders, which came with this really weird number pad controller, kind of like what you see on, like ColecoVision controllers and Atari 5200 controllers, and it has an overlay on it for Star Raiders. I don't know if there were any other games that actually use this. The only game I really know is Star Raiders, since I have it kind of packaged in there with it. But overall, I am getting... I've been talking a lot. So overall, I think that is every single version of the Atari 2600 I have. That is a lot of different variants of the cartridge. So the Atari 2600 is just such a bizarre console. And I mean, if you ever get into collecting for it, it is just really, really expansive. Probably more expansive than any other console out there, because of the variants and just that, like thousands of games. Even NES only has like 700 or so, definitely expect to have to go crazy if you want to get all the Atari 2600 games. And most of them are like, 50 cent to $1 games, which isn't super bad if you are trying to collect for it. But yeah, just a lot of stuff to go over, and I still have no idea how Coleco pulled that off. Having their own name on things that play Atari games, I don't get how they did that. But if anyone does know those stories, or anything like that, please post comments down below, because I would love to hear about those things that I just have not been able to figure out otherwise. But anyway, I hope that everyone really enjoyed that. If there are any versions of the Atari 2600 that I did not show, and you want to, post about them in the comments, just basically, if you have anything that you can think of that you want to post a comment about, I will be very happy to read it, and will probably get back to you. But anyway, I believe that this is where this video is finally going to end off. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. And I hope to see you next time for something different. So thanks, and see you later.